As the late great Marvin Gaye once sang, what's going on? There is a comment that has been made about Daniel Kretinsky and West Ham United, which, if it's true, could be rather significant. Football finance expert Stefan Borson was asked recently why it had taken so long for Kretinsky's proposed deal to buy the shares from the Gold family to actually get over the line. And his answer was quite interesting. His suggestion was that the Gold family were basically waiting for Kretinsky to put his money where his mouth was, and that for whatever reason, Kretinsky wasn't liquid enough at the time to actually buy the shares he indicated he would buy. Now, that's quite a statement because we're not talking about someone who's struggling to find a few million quid. We're talking about Daniel Kretinsky, a man with a personal fortune estimated in the billions. In fact, I looked it up earlier today, and Bloomberg Billionaires Index suggests this was May 2026. He's worth 8.8 billion pounds. Sunday Times Rich List 2026, 8.185 billion pounds. Forbes suggesting his value is between 7.8 to 8 billion pounds. So this man's got money. So when someone like Stefan Borson suggests Kretinsky couldn't get his hands on money required to complete a deal, naturally you've got to question how accurate that assumption is. Now, I've got to be honest with you, I'm not entirely convinced by Stefan Borson's explanation. But the more I look at the situation, the more I actually think that the biggest issue isn't whether Borson's right or wrong. It's that West Ham fans simply don't know what on earth is going on at the moment. And we're all speculating, and making wild assumptions of our own. And I think this has become a huge problem that really needs addressing. Daniel Kretinsky is apparently aiming to become the most important person at the club. In his way, we've got Amanda Staveley trying to buy the Gold family shares. Now we've got this pre-emption process going on. And through it all, we've got players who are leaving this football club for significant amounts of money, and not a lot of money is being invested to replace them. Now, more players are leaving than arriving, and this is causing a huge anxiety amongst the fan base. I don't think that's a good thing. I'm not asking Daniel Kretinsky to come out and tell us what players West Ham are trying to sign, but I do think he or his representatives at this football club need to give fans a better understanding of what exactly is happening at this moment in time, especially with the whole issue of the shares and the ownership. Because at the moment, we're being asked to trust a plan that no one really has properly explained to us. We go back to what's happened. We know Sullivan resigned from the board as chairman. Kretinsky looked to increase his influence. There was the proposed deal to buy the Vanessa Gold shares, or the Gold family shares, with Kretinsky saying he was going to acquire 16% of those shares. And there was also the expectation that on the back of that, Kretinsky would invest a significant amount of money into this football club. There was rumours of 90 to 100 million pounds being put in the transfer kitty. None of that's happened. The Gold deal hasn't happened, and long before we knew it, Amanda Staveley was part of the picture. She came forward, of course, with her own proposal and reached an agreement with Vanessa Gold to buy the entire Gold shares, 25.1% of them, for 150 million pounds. Now, this has created rather a really frustrating situation where we have two very powerful forces seemingly involved in this power play, and it's so ill-timed during the transfer window. Now, on August the 1st, West Ham issued a statement following the announcement that Vanessa Gold was provisionally going to sell to Staveley. And the statement was very clear. The deal would now go through a pre-emption process. So that means, I'm sure you already know, existing shareholders get the opportunity to buy their proportional share first. And then any remaining shares will go into the second stage of this pre-emption process. Now, this whole process takes 2 months. By my estimation, we're kind of about 3 weeks into it, into the first stage of the pre-emption process. Now, the promise during this process was that nothing would change regarding the ownership and the structure of this football club until it was completed. The statement also went on to say that the day-to-day running of this football club was not going to be affected. and that the statement closed with the club saying it would make no further comment until the pre-emption process runs its course. That's fine. I understand that. If there's a legal process going on involving the shareholders, there are obviously things you can't talk about publicly. And we're not asking to know anything about the process itself. But you don't want West Ham fans, sitting there trying to understand what else is going on, because there's a difference between saying we're not going to comment on the ownership process, understand that, and effectively leaving fans to work out everything else for themselves. Because look what's happened since then. As I've already said, we've been selling players and selling them for substantial amounts of money. We've seen around 160 million pounds generated in player sales so far. And then we have to consider the huge amount of money that's saved on the wage bill itself, which is significant. But at the same time, we've watched the squad develop some massive holes in it that have yet to be filled. Now, I'm going to be fair here. West Ham have signed players. We got Veltman, we got Solomon, Engels, and now Joel Pirro as well. But I'm not sitting there pretending that nothing's happened. But with roughly 2 weeks of the transfer window remaining, I think most West Ham fans would look at this squad and say, we're not finished by a long shot. We still need more players to come in. Personally, I don't think we're probably looking at, I think we need at least another maybe 4, maybe 5 players to, give ourselves a genuinely serious chance of putting a squad together to get straight back up to the Premier League. But will we get them? And I've got I go back to the statement and ask exactly, what does business as usual mean? That's what West Ham told us. They said the day-to-day running of this club is not affected. So does that mean the transfer budget is exactly what it was before the ownership situation developed? Does it mean Kretinsky is still planning to put significant money into this football club? Or is that now dead in the water? Or are there financial concerns that we don't know about? Because if there are, someone actually told us. Seriously, if West Ham are having to be careful with money because of the financial position of this football club's in, then just say so. If the club has decided it doesn't want to spend huge amounts of money because we're in the Championship, that's fine too. If Kretinsky's waiting until the ownership situation is resolved before committing further funds, then we really do need to know this, because at the very least, we then know what's going on. But the situation is this. If Kretinsky is waiting for the pre-emption process to end before investing money, it's too late, because there are only 2 weeks left of this transfer window. And as far as I can work out, there's still another week to go for the first stage of the pre-emption process, and then another 4 weeks thereafter. I'm not going to sit here and tell you how much money Daniel Kretinsky's got in his bank account. I don't know, but I do feel that he's probably got enough money to be able to put into this football club and buy out the gold shares if he wanted to, because if he was genuinely struggling, as Borson has suggested, if he was genuinely struggling to find the money to purchase the gold shares, then why did he have a plan to invest 90, 100 million pounds into the club to buy players? If you can't afford the shares, then you simply can't afford to inject any money in it. Look, for West Ham to announce, that the pre-emption process is nearly done, I think would be significant. I think maybe if there is 1 week to go at the end of the first stage, I think we should have a statement to come out and say what's happened. What we know is Kretinsky can buy roughly 9% of the 25.1% gold shares that are available. That's going to cost him around 54 million pounds. That's based on the 600 million pound valuation that Staveley has set on the club. If Kretinsky is the only one willing to go into that process, then he goes into stage 2. What I would like to hear at that point, doesn't have to give details, but just at least say, stage 1 is finished. This is where we're at. Stage 2 will now be triggered. Even if they say that, stage 2 will now be triggered, that's better than nothing, because at least we know that someone of the current shareholders has put their bid forward. Because stage 2 can only happen if someone actually puts a bid forward at stage 1. Look, After everything that's happened at this football club, this was meant to be a new era. 50,000 season ticket holders have renewed, even despite relegation. We've got fans who have bought into the idea that this was going to be a one-season rebuild and that West Ham are going to try and get straight back up to the Premier League. There's a huge amount of goodwill from the supporters' side. But goodwill doesn't last forever if supporters don't understand what's happening. You can't just say to people, trust us, everything is in hand. At some point, you've got to give us a reason to trust. And I think that's where West Ham are kind of getting it wrong at the moment. I don't actually think most supporters are demanding that Kretinsky invests his own money into this club. Why should he at this moment in time? What he's found himself in is in a position where he's quite vulnerable. He thought he had a plan, to acquire the gold shares. That's been scuppered. So of course he's got to make sure that his situation is stable before he can invest the money in it. But if what's happened at board level has actually impacted on his apparent willingness to invest in this football club, then just be honest and so. Just say things have changed. The Staveley situation has changed. Our situation, we have to go for plan B. And if the plan is to continue selling even more players and continue to reduce the wage bill and replace them with cheaper, younger and older options, then lay out that plan and say, tell us what we need to know. But that's okay again, so long as we get the right players in to navigate our way out of this league. But clearly, if we're not investing that sort of money that Kretinsky was meant to be investing, we're not going for our first choice players, are we? Look, I've got to be fair. I think the players we've acquired are actually decent, in terms of what we need in the Championship. Players like Solomon and Pirro know this league well, and they can do really good for us. But if the ownership situation is preventing this football club from making certain decisions in player purchases, then I think we've got a right to know, because that does impact on the business as usual statement that was recently put out. Most fans believe that the whole share and ownership issue has had a massive setback on our transfer plans. But I want to be told otherwise. I want Daniel Kretinsky to tell me something different if I've got the wrong end of the stick. Doesn't need to tell us everything, but I think he needs to tell us, or his representatives need to tell us enough for supporters to understand what the future of this football club is. And most importantly, enough to understand whether West Ham United are genuinely doing everything they can do to get us back into the Premier League at the first opportunity. Because that's what we care about, isn't it? And right now, with the transfers coming in so slow, many fans don't believe that this is the strategy to get us back to where we need to be at first time of asking. I guess we just all deserve a little bit of clarity.